Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. Today we're going to talk about math and gaming, and we're going to talk about puzzle games, and I, for one, am excited for that. For several reasons, right? Shocking to no one whatsoever, I am a huge fan of puzzles, and you know I like gaming in general, and I like math, and so they're a killer combo, and I want to talk about puzzle games as a whole. But I also want to talk about puzzles in games, in a general sense, because puzzles are such a big part of gaming. And I also want to talk about some things that don't seem like puzzles, but they are. So let's get into it. So when it comes to puzzle games, right? Like their whole big thing is that puzzle solving, that problem solving idea and theme is a big part of its identity. And I like that because when it comes to puzzles, right, you're dealing with these situations where you have to solve this problem, right? You have what's given to you, whether it's explicit or not, or kind of lurking under the surface, and you have to figure out how things function and flow, or you're given how things function and flow, and you have to get to the results that you need to get to, or figure out what that means in any given context, right? And it can mean so many different things, right? Because you could have different puzzle games where the idea is something like Tetris, where you're given the rules of that, and you're like, hey, I have these falling blocks, and I'm trying to sort them up into lines and get rid of those lines. But I know that they have these different shapes, and I can turn them, and I can do this and that to them. And I'm just trying to think ahead while I'm trying to, reduce the lines. And there's more to say about Tetris in the future, for the record, and I can't believe I haven't talked about that like on a much larger level, though it's come up periodically, right? Um, I'm going to be saying some more about that in the future, and I look forward to it. But that's just one example, right? Where you have like the rules, you have something, and you know how it functions and how it flows, but then you have that idea of like, oh, well, here's the objective. Let me see what I can do to make this work, right? And you might have games where you have different like word problems that you have to like tackle, or things that are similar to like Tetris in the sense where, hey, I have this whole situation here where maybe I have these shapes or these elements and I'm trying to piece them together in order to reduce this or gain this or whatever the case may be. And again, like there's so many different approaches to these puzzle games, right? Because you could have, different elements, like I was saying, or different shapes, different blocks, and deal with different rules surrounding them. But you could also have different word problems. You could have different things that you're doing in a level. You could be trying to find all of this object or that object, or trying to get rid of this or trying to get rid of that. There's just so many things to it, and there are plenty of games and have been over time where puzzle solving is that big element. But there are also several games where puzzles were not the necessarily like the main star, like the main character, but they were absolutely a regular in that game's identity. And I think about games like various the Legend of Zelda titles or Alan Wake, those like games. In particular, the 3D Prince of Persia games, like the Sands of Time trilogy, that sort of thing. There are plenty of other examples too, but like I think about those sort of games and series because the puzzles are a big part of them. Like recently, I've been playing The Legend of Zelda, like Tears of the Kingdom, and there's so many puzzles in there, in the kind of sense that you're expecting. Like so many of the shrines, for instance, are examples of that. And I have like a video that will be coming out in the future about that game as a whole. But the idea with those puzzles is like there are some things where it's like it's exactly what you're thinking of in terms of math, where you're like, hey, maybe I'm playing off the shapes here and there, and dealing with a lot of geometry, whether explicitly said or not, but it shows up to you. Or maybe it's like, oh, I'm dealing with what I'm used to for math. But then there's a lot of other things where it's just kind of lurking under the surface. But what I like about those sort of games is like, you have a theme for any given shrine, and you have like different objects that you might come across in that shrine, and you can piece that together with the objectives and the type of abilities that you have to start to put the pieces together of that puzzle and get to that goal. And from there, you have that larger effect of like, oh, okay, so I'm solving this puzzle, I'm solving that puzzle, and you're getting like the sorry, the lights that you get, like the lights of blessing that you get, which eventually allow you to increase your health or your stamina, or both if you're just wanting to diversify a little, or be more even. But I bring that up because like they're a big part of that game, and then like with Alan Wake, there's definitely like different things that pop up. There was like in Alan Wake 2 in particular, I liked that there was actually like several word problems that you had to like solve, and I really dug that. And with like I mentioned Prince of Persia, like the Sands of Time trilogy, like there's various Prince of Persia games at this point. There was ones before those games, and there's been some after, and puzzles are not uncommon. But I think what stood out to me about that Sands of Time trilogy is you have like the time mechanic is being a big part of that you can play around with in some puzzles, where it's like, hey, I have to manipulate this thing or that thing in the room to get this thing to do that thing, and so on and so forth. And so it's like there are several games, like I mentioned before, where like puzzle solving is the main star, but then there's several others where it's a big element. But I would go one step further, where it's like whether or not it's like in your face, like in a puzzle game in that very, very direct way, or like Alan Wake games or the Legend of Zelda, where it's like these are not exclusively puzzle solving games, right? Because they have these different like, action elements and among other things, but it's such a big part of it, right? But then I'd argue that like pretty much every game that you're dealing with, you are dealing with puzzles, and they're just such a big part of games. And so one of the big examples that like stands out to me, right, that you might not think of is a puzzle, is a boss fight. For a lot of boss fights, they have the idea that you are dealing with your health and their health and trying to manage that, right? That's not all boss fights, right? Because there's different games, different rules. In some games where they have that standards for the boss fight, have different rules for different fights. But I bring it up because one of the big things is like you're managing your health and you're trying to solve a problem at the same time, right? Or that managing your health and their health is the same thing because right, you're either trying to stay at 100% or trying to not get to 0%, right? And you're trying to take down the boss and trying to get them to go down to 0% in terms of their health. Now, that is the main idea, right? And it's like, well, so how do you do that? You know what you're trying to get in terms of the solution, but how do you get to the solution? And so what gets crazy to me is like game to game, this will vary, right? Like series to series, game to game, and even within the same game, I think like Metal Gear, like that whole idea of that series, like one, Metal Gear is one of my favorite series of all time, and that's not something that should shock you if you've been like following some of my stuff, right? Long enough, but it's one of my big ones. And one of the big things that the whole Metal Gear franchise is known for, notably during the whole, like massive Metal Gear Solid era, is that they've had some pretty stellar boss fights where you have what you want to do, which is like take down this boss, but these bosses, right, they act differently, right, from one another, and you have to figure out what to do there because it's like you have how your character is going to act, whether it be like Snake or Raiden or whatever, or Big Boss in some cases. So you have how your characters are going to be like move, how they function, how they flow within this world, and then you have like these different bosses in these different settings, and you're figuring out how they all operate, right? Because it's a different situation fighting Gray Fox than it is fighting Psycho Mantis. And then like with Liquid, like, and this is just me thinking of that just with Metal Gear Solid because God, I do that game so much. So yeah, it's different fighting Gray Fox than it is fighting Psycho Mantis than it is Liquid in any of the times that you fight Liquid. And same with Raven and same with like Sniper Wolf. And you fight some of those characters more than once, and they're different those times. And so you have to figure out how these bosses are functioning, how they're flowing, what are the rules that they have with their type of combat. And so you're putting these pieces together to solve that puzzle, like defeat that boss and move forward within the game. And I don't think that we necessarily always think about boss fights in that sense, but they're a puzzle to be solved. And I dig that. So my whole big thing, and I feel like you could dissect this way more because there's so many different types of puzzle games out there, and there's plenty of games where, again, puzzles are not necessarily the main star per se, but they're absolutely a part of the regular cast. And then there's just that idea that, when it comes to gaming, you have this idea of solving a puzzle, you have this idea of problem solving. It is thoroughly baked in. And, no matter how you cut it, right? Like it's all math, whether it's that logic element or, geometry, algebra, arithmetic, whatever the case may be, you're using math all the time. And then, of course, there are some more like, games that are like you're dealing with physics and stuff like that, and so in that more direct sense that you're probably used to, you're able to see that math, but it is there whether it's on the surface or lurking underneath. And I dig that. I like math, I like puzzles, I like gaming. They're all great, and you got a killer union with all of those things. I'll see you in the future. Professor Prime out.